sir.
I can give you a reason. You're acting suspicious.
Officer, I'm just reading my papers. What exactly is suspicious about sitting in a parking lot?
Look around. People like you usually don't hang around areas like this unless they're up to something. Step out.
The patrol car rolled in slow and quiet, tires crunching over loose gravel, and in that moment, before a single word was spoken, everything changed for the man sitting alone in his car, because the officer approaching him had already decided he did not belong there. Before I continue, I want to know something real quick. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please take 1 second to subscribe. These stories matter, and you don't want to miss what happens next. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where nothing feels urgent. The parking lot was half full, people coming and going with shopping bags, kids laughing, engines starting and stopping. In the far corner of the lot sat a dark blue sedan, parked straight between the lines. Inside the car was a black man named Leonard Cross, calm and relaxed, reading documents from a thin folder resting on his lap. Leonard was in his early 50s. He dressed simple. Plain shirt, clean shoes, no loud colors, no nervous movement. He was waiting for his spouse to finish inside one of the stores. That was it. No rush, no danger, just time passing. What Leonard did not know was that an officer named Evan Rourke had just noticed his car. Officer Rourke had been on the force for over a decade. He worked alone that day, driving slow through the plaza like he had done hundreds of times before. When his eyes landed on Leonard's car, he slowed down even more. Nothing was happening. No calls came in. No reports. No alerts. Still, he turned his wheel and pulled in behind the sedan, close enough to block it from leaving. No lights, no siren, no radio call to dispatch. He stepped out of his patrol car and walked straight up to the driver's side window. Leonard saw him coming. He closed his folder, placed it on the passenger seat, and rested both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. He had learned long ago that small movements could be misunderstood. The knock on the window was sharp and hard. Leonard rolled the window down halfway. Rourke leaned in slightly, his shadow falling across Leonard's chest. "What are you doing here?" the officer asked. Leonard answered calmly. He explained he was waiting for his spouse and reviewing work papers. His voice was steady. No attitude. No sarcasm. Rourke didn't like the answer. He scanned the inside of the car slowly, like he expected to find something hidden. There was nothing. No bags, no tools, no mess. Just papers, glasses, and a phone in Leonard's pocket. Rourke asked for identification. Leonard paused and asked a simple question. He wanted to know if he was being detained or if he was free to go. That question flipped something inside the officer. Rourke's tone changed. His shoulders tightened. He leaned closer to the window. "I don't need a reason," he said. "You're acting suspicious." Leonard stayed calm. He asked what was suspicious about sitting in a parking lot, reading papers, in the middle of the afternoon. Rourke looked around the plaza, then back at Leonard. "People like you don't usually sit around places like this unless there's a reason," he said. "Step out of the vehicle." The words hit hard. Leonard felt it in his chest. He knew exactly what people like you meant. Still, he did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He asked again if he was being detained and what law he had broken. Rourke ignored the question. "Step out. Now." Leonard moved slowly. He told the officer his wallet was in the center console. The officer's hand immediately dropped to his belt. "Don't move," Rourke snapped. Leonard froze, then carefully followed instructions. He opened the door. He stepped out. He kept his hands visible the entire time. Anyone watching would see full cooperation. Rourke guided Leonard to the hood of the car and told him to place his hands flat on the metal. People walked past them. A few slowed down. Some stared. Others pretended not to see. The pat-down was rough and unnecessary. Rourke pressed harder than needed, searching for something that was not there. He found nothing. No weapon. No drugs. No threat. Still, Rourke wasn't finished. He reached into the car himself and took Leonard's wallet. He flipped it open, pulled out the license, and stared at it longer than normal. Then he looked back at Leonard. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly, but he covered it fast. He walked back to his patrol car and ran the name through the system. Leonard stood there in silence, hands still on the hood, heart beating slow but heavy. He had done this before. He knew the routine. He also knew how quickly things could go wrong. Minutes passed. Dispatch came back clear. No warrants. No history. Nothing. Rourke stepped out again, license still in hand. Instead of apologizing, he started asking more questions. Where do you live? Why are you here? Who are you waiting for? What do you do for work? Leonard answered each one. Calm, direct, honest. When Leonard explained he worked for the city, the officer let out a short laugh, the kind that carried disrespect. Doing what? Rourke asked. Leonard told him he worked in administration. The officer shook his head slightly, like he didn't believe it. Usually folks like you are somewhere else, Rourke said. The words were quiet but clear, and the body camera on his chest recorded every single second. By now, more than 10 minutes had passed. Leonard was still being held, still not told what crime he committed, still treated like a suspect. Then Leonard's phone buzzed in his pocket. Rourke immediately noticed. Don't answer that, the officer ordered. Leonard explained it was important. The officer repeated the order. Leonard made a decision. Calm, careful, but firm. He reached for the phone anyway. Rourke raised his voice and stepped closer. Leonard answered the call. He spoke clearly and evenly. He said he was currently being detained by an officer. He said the officer's name out loud. He said he would explain more shortly. Rourke's face tightened. When Leonard ended the call, the officer demanded to know who he had spoken to. Leonard looked directly at him and told him. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. Leonard Cross was not just a city worker. He was the civilian director of the independent board that reviewed police misconduct for the entire department. The officer standing in front of him had just detained, searched, and spoken down to the man whose job was to investigate officers like him. Rourke's posture changed instantly. His voice softened. His shoulders dropped. His words became polite. He handed the license back and said Leonard was free to go. Leonard took the license, said nothing more, and waited until his spouse returned before leaving. The officer walked back to his car, unaware that his own body camera had already sealed his fate. And this was only the beginning. Officer Evan Rourke sat alone in his patrol car after Leonard Cross drove away, hands still resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, because deep down he already knew something was wrong. Very wrong. And no amount of polite words at the end of that encounter could undo what had just been recorded. The parking lot returned to normal. Cars moved in and out. People laughed. The moment passed for everyone else. But for Rourke, time slowed. He did not turn the engine on right away. He did not radio anything in. He just sat there, replaying the encounter in his head, especially the part where Leonard calmly said who he was. Rourke checked his body camera without touching it. He knew better than to turn it off. That alone would have made things worse. The red light was still blinking, still recording, still holding every word, every pause, every tone. Leonard, on the other hand, drove away quietly. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his chest felt tight. He had been humiliated in public. Again. And this time, it happened while he was doing nothing more than waiting. Leonard did not call the media. He did not post online. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he did what he had always believed in: process. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table and wrote everything down while it was fresh. The time, the location, the officer's name, the exact words used. He'd attached his phone record showing the call during the detention. He signed it and submitted it through the proper channel. He did not file the complaint himself. A witness already had. Inside one of the stores, a woman had seen part of the stop through the front window. She saw a man standing against his own car. She saw an officer pat him down. She saw no struggle, no reason, no emergency. It bothered her enough that she filled out a complaint before she even left the plaza. That single complaint triggered an automatic review. 2 days later, the footage was pulled. 3 supervisors sat in a small room and watched the body cam together. No one spoke for the first few minutes. They heard the knock. They heard the questions. They heard the words, "People like you." One supervisor leaned back in his chair and shook his head. Another paused the video and rewound it. They watched it again. By the time the footage ended, there was no debate. This was bad. The police chief was notified that same afternoon. He closed his office door and watched the footage alone. He did not skip ahead. He watched every second, including the long silence while Leonard stood against his car. By the end, the chief knew this could not be contained. The city manager was called, then the city attorney. Within 72 hours, everyone at the top knew exactly what happened in that parking lot. Leonard was invited to a private meeting. He arrived on time, dressed the same way he always dressed. No anger. No threats. Just facts. He spoke clearly. He explained how it felt to be treated as a criminal without cause. He described the moment the officer's hand went to his weapon. He explained the fear that comes with knowing how fast situations like that can turn deadly. The room was silent when he finished. The city attorney spoke next and said what everyone was already thinking. There was no defense. None. If this footage ever reached a jury, the city would lose. Still, Leonard did not rush to court. 1 week passed. Then Leonard filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The lawsuit named Officer Evan Rourke and the city itself. It accused them of unlawful detention, racial discrimination, and violation of constitutional rights. It demanded accountability, not just money. The police union reacted immediately. They released statements. They called the incident a misunderstanding. They argued the officer was doing his job. They asked for patience. Behind closed doors, they prepared for a fight. The city attorney reviewed everything again and made a recommendation: settle fast. But Leonard had conditions. He did not want a quiet payout. He did not want a transfer. He did not want training. He wanted work gone. The negotiations were tense. The union pushed back hard. They said termination was too extreme. They said this was a first offense. They asked for suspension instead. Leonard's response was simple. If the officer stayed, the case would go to trial. The footage would be shown in open court. The public would see everything. That changed the tone. The city knew what would happen if the video went public. Trust would collapse. The department's reputation would take a massive hit. Other past complaints would resurface. After weeks of closed-door meetings, the decision was made. Officer Evan Rourke was terminated. He was called into headquarters on a Friday morning. He walked in wearing his uniform. He walked out without his badge or his weapon. His career ended in less than 10 minutes. The settlement was finalized shortly after. The amount was never officially released, but it was substantial. More importantly, the footage would be released. When the video went public, it spread fast. Millions watched. People heard the words. They saw the search. They saw the silence. They saw the fear. Comments poured in from across the country. Story after story. Different cities, same pattern. The department tried to respond, but it was already too late. And then reporters started digging. What they found made everything worse. Officer Work had a history. Multiple complaints. Similar situations. Similar language. Each time, there was no video. Each time, the officer was cleared. This time, there was proof. And the proof could not be ignored. The department announced policy changes. Body cameras became mandatory for all citizen contact. Oversight gained more power. Footage access became independent. But for Work, it was over. His certification was revoked. His appeals failed. Arbitration upheld the termination. Leonard returned to work quietly. He never celebrated. He never spoke publicly. He simply continued doing the job he believed in. Because this was never about revenge. It was about accountability. And in the final chapter, the full weight of what this case changed, for the department, for the city, and for people watching from the outside, finally becomes clear. By the time the arbitration hearing ended, there was nothing left for Officer Evan Work to argue, but he still sat there stiff and silent, because the truth had already been played on a large screen 3 times, and no explanation could erase what everyone had seen and heard. The hearing room was small. No cameras. No crowd. Just a few officials, union representatives, lawyers, and Leonard Cross sitting calmly at one end of the table. Rourke sat at the other end, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes fixed forward. He did not look at Leonard. The arbitrator asked Leonard to describe what happened that day. Leonard spoke slowly. He explained the setting, the parking lot, the papers, the waiting. He described the knock on the window, the tone, the words that followed. He explained how it felt when the officer's hand dropped to his weapon. He explained how public humiliation stays with you long after the moment ends. Then came the only direct exchange between them since the parking lot. The arbitrator asked Rourke if he had anything to say to Leonard. Rourke cleared his throat and spoke briefly. He said he believed he acted within his training. He said he felt Leonard was being uncooperative. He said he never meant to offend anyone. Leonard responded once and only once. He said cooperation does not mean silence, and authority does not mean unchecked power. That was it. The arbitrator did not hesitate. The decision was clear. Termination upheld. Appeal denied. Rourke stood up and left without another word. Outside that room, his future collapsed fast. His termination was reported to the state licensing board. His certification was revoked. No badge. No uniform. No second chance. Every law enforcement agency saw the footage before seeing his application. No one called back. Meanwhile, the body camera video continued spreading online. News stations broke it down frame by frame. Experts explained why the stop was unlawful. Civil rights groups used it as an example. Police academies played it during training sessions, not as a lesson in bravery, but as a warning. This is what not to do. More people came forward. Some shared stories about similar encounters. Others shared stories about Work himself. Same behavior, same tone, same assumptions. The only difference before had been the lack of proof. Leonard watched none of it. He returned to his office and continued his work. He reviewed complaints. He met with community members. He pushed for policy changes that had been delayed for years. The oversight board he led was given new authority. They no longer had to ask permission to view footage. They could access it independently. That changed everything. Officers became more careful. Supervisors became more involved. Complaints were taken more seriously. The department did not become perfect, but it became different. And that difference mattered. Months later, Leonard was asked privately how it felt to be the person who brought down an officer. He answered simply. He said he was never trying to bring anyone down. He was trying to make sure no one else had to stand against their own car for doing nothing. The city never admitted wrongdoing publicly, but their actions spoke louder than words. Policy changes, training updates, oversight expansion, quiet settlements in other cases that suddenly moved faster. All of it traced back to one moment in a parking lot. Rourke tried to move on. He changed states. He applied for private security jobs. Some interviews ended the moment his name was searched. Others ended after the video was mentioned. The footage followed him everywhere. He avoided social media. He avoided old colleagues. He stopped wearing anything that could identify him as former law enforcement. The power he once carried was gone. Leonard's life returned to routine. Grocery runs, work meetings, quiet evenings. But he knew something important had happened. Not just to him, but because of him. He had been the wrong person to harass. Not because he was special. Not because he was powerful. But because the system finally met proof it could not ignore. Body cameras had done what words alone never could. They showed the truth without emotion, without opinion, without bias. Just facts. A man sitting in a car. An officer making assumptions. A line crossed. Consequences delivered. Years later, new officers would watch that footage during training. They would hear the words, "people like you," and shift uncomfortably in their seats. They would be told that those words ended a career. And somewhere out there, someone would sit in a parking lot, waiting, reading, existing, without being stopped, because of what happened that day. Justice did not come from shouting. It did not come from violence. It did not come from revenge. It came from accountability. And sometimes, the universe makes sure the person you choose to mistreat is the exact person who can hold you responsible. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, type justice in the comments. And remember this. The most dangerous thing for abuse of power is not anger. It is evidence.